Hi, everyone, and welcome to this, our third in the series of 5 webcasts for the summer webcast series, if you will. So far, we've been talking about experiential learning. We talked about in the first webcast, we visited about experiential learning and as a high impact practice and what that means and how we can dig into that a little bit and understand it maybe a little bit better. Last week we talked about best ways to engage students in this because they are obviously a big part of the experiential learning process and taking ownership of their own learning. This week, want to kind of shift gears a little bit. This week, we want to talk about the environment in which we all operate, and that is the higher education environment and kind of what's going on around us and things that are in our culture that are influencing the things that we're doing. Certainly things that students are facing, that students are dealing with, what their expectations are, what their viewpoints are. I don't think I could find an argument with anybody here if I said, well, students today are much different than they were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 25 years ago, whatever. I think we would be in consensus with that. But I think that there's some similarities, but at the same time, there really are some significant differences. And a lot of times we have to have a better understanding of not just our students. And I love that. I can't remember the school that puts it out. Bentley, I think it is, puts out the 25 or 50 things that didn't happen when this year's freshmen were born or something like that. And it's a good reminder of how we as a society have evolved. Maybe use that term lightly, but again, how we've changed, how our society has changed, the things that were not around when our freshmen that are moving into our classrooms now didn't have or wasn't around when they were born. So this is a generation that is never known anything but high-speed internet, and they don't know what a dial tone AOL sounds like and things like that. So I always love reading that list because it is such a good reminder. But at the same time, I think it misses kind of the bigger picture because our students, we all operate within the context of a societal structure, and that structure is changing pretty rapidly. And so today I want to take some time and hopefully start some conversation around some talking points that have been gathered, and just get your thoughts on how this impacts us as we are trying to engage students to help them make this transition from one chapter of their life to another. And the fact that our institutions of higher learning are no longer destinations as I think that they once were. And I think in a lot of ways we still look at ourselves as a destination, but how we can change that mindset where we are not just a destination, but more like a conduit and an accelerator and an incubator of talent that is moving through us. And our job is to help to make the conduit smooth so that they flow through nicely, but also making sure that they're getting what they need so that when they leave the other end of our conduit, that they're leaving at a much faster rate than what they came in. And that their careers are accelerated, that their social mobility is accelerated, that their lives have been changed in a really positive way. So that's kind of setting up our conversation for today. Again, if you have any questions at any point in time, please just enter them into the Ask a Question function. I'm looking at those here, and I'll make sure that I keep an eye on those. But for those of you that are new and joining us, I just wanted to recap a quick introduction. Hello, my name is Dr. Robert Schindel. I am the president and CEO of InternBridge. We are a research and consulting firm that focuses in on, I know, imagine that, experiential learning. And our primary focus has been, for the last dozen or so years, really working with employers to help them build better internship and entry talent acquisition programs. But along the way, we do a lot of research and a lot of surveying of students that have had internship experiences, because we want to keep our finger on the pulse of their experiences and what kind of trying to see the world through their eyes and what their internship experiences are like, but also working with higher education. And for the next couple months, I'm going to be working with Shelly and her team in the over at the ranch, as they like to call it, the Experiential Education and Engagement Center, and looking at how we can create a culture of experiential learning throughout campus, that every student has an opportunity to engage in experiential learning in one way, shape, or form. This includes internships, it includes service learning, volunteering, undergraduate research, student teaching. All of those things really fall under this umbrella of experiential learning. And we've done this with more than 500 different universities over the last dozen or so years, worked with thousands of employers, and also done a lot of research and have been the principal investigator on many of our studies. So I tell you this not to impress you, but to impress upon you that when we talk about internships, we want to try, or we try to take a very data-driven approach to it. Let's look at what the data is telling us, or what the data says, and what's the story behind that. And one of the things that we're going to be doing at the ranch is gathering that data and being able to measure the impact of what the impact that experiential learning has on our students. And I'm really excited about getting down the road with that, because that's going to help to inform us as a campus the things that we can do in order to better impact our students' lives. So with that, let's get started. Again, for those of you that are just joining us, much of our conversation is rooted in the following statement by John Dewey, written in 1903: presenting students with experiential learning opportunities means that the whole pupil is engaged. The artificial gap between life in school and out is reduced. Again, 118 years later, and we're still trying to figure this really simple concept out. I think it's important that we continue to chip away at this and use this as almost our, let's call it our philosophical framework, right? This is our utopia. This is where we want to get to. And as long as we can use this as our North Star, I think that we will continue to move in the right direction as we engage in and work towards building this culture of experiential learning at Auburn University at Montgomery. Why? Well, because as we discussed last week, there's some questioning going on. Our constituents and those that we seek to serve, our stakeholders, are starting to question: is the value of higher education worth the cost? And I think that what we're seeing out there is in the market is a reaction to the idea that higher education is not worth the cost. And we're seeing credential stacking and organizations basically creating their own learning management systems, hiring students without college degrees, where at one point that they would, but saying, hey, listen, if you want to learn, we will teach you. And they have their own internal universities. I mean, some companies even call them their university, like McDonald's has McDonald's University, where they are teaching and have as their instructors college level professors who are going in and teaching management and leadership, and they're teaching supply chain, and they're teaching all of these things. And I think a lot of that is a somewhat of a knee-jerk reaction to the idea that we talked about this in the first week, that employers do not feel that students are employment ready upon graduation. So they're saying, hey, you know what? I'm just going to do it myself. And that is posing some challenges for us because it impacts our enrollment. It impacts our retention because employers are saying, you don't need to finish your college degree. Just come to us and we'll train you for what you want. And we know that our students, are they're 18, 19, 20 years old a lot of times, or even if they are more mature adults, they may have a lack of maturity in the world of work. So they look at this and say, hey, I got to provide for my family. I'm going to make a short-term decision and kind of give up my long-term goals. So I think all of our conversations around building a culture of experiential learning really do need to focus on these last two slides. John Dewey's quote and vision, and the idea that we need to create value in our proposition to students and employers in our community. And when we do, the reward for that is going to be more students are going to hear about it, and they are going to make the choice to come to AUM because of the culture. So, and again, many of you have had, like myself, have had students that have done some type of experiential learning in your classes. I can tell within about 15 seconds of the beginning, back when we were in person seats, I can tell within 15 seconds of the class starting who had done an internship and who hasn't, just by the way that they bring themselves into the classroom, how they're dressed, how they get prepared for the beginning of class, what they do with their syllabus when they get it. Students that have an internship generally will open it up and start making notes in the margins. You can just tell. We also know that the tangible outcomes for students are that students will see a grade point average increase of anywhere between a half and a full letter grade after an internship. We know that their time to degree completion after an internship is much shorter than another student who, starting at the same time, did not do an internship by at least a semester, if not more. So again, we know that the investment in experiential learning yields results for the student and for us as an institution of higher learning. But I don't know if we've done a very good job of scaling that. And my hope is that that's kind of the end result of the conversations that we're having and the programs that Shelley and her team that we're all working on together. So we hit 2021 after just a crazy 2020. I mean, let's face it, it was what it was. We got through it. I think we adapted really well. I think our students really adapted well. I know in the employers that I work with, many of them said, summer of 2020, our students that, if we did do an internship, most likely it was a virtual internship. But the only reason it worked was because the students were so involved and so engaged in making it work. And I think that's a real testament to our students, but it is also an indication of where our students are and their abilities to adapt. I think we saw that a lot of times in our own classes last year when we were forced to go virtual, but the end result was ultimately pretty positive. And that was that employers understood that, hey, you know what, we did all right, so we're going to move forward. But this time that we're going through and this time that the students are going through is going to leave an indelible impression on them. Some of these things are personal to them as individuals, but I think that we can also look at some of the information that's coming out now. We're starting to look back and starting to research and thank goodness people started to collect some data back in 2020 on the impact that this was having, not just in health-wise, but mental health and how it impacts higher ed. But there was an article written back in, I think it was February, And it was by the gentleman I mentioned in a previous email or a previous presentation. Brandon Bustede wrote this in Forbes, and the article was pretty powerful because it really kind of laid out some things that I think that we know, but we need to really internalize. We've heard these things, we talk about these things a little bit, but really the impact. And when you see the PDF in the recording, each of the articles in here is hyperlinked. So in the PDF, you can click on it and go to the actual article that Brandon was referencing. But his article was just 21 stats for 2021 that we need to know. And I think that it encompasses this change that we're going through with the underlying idea of how can we create more value for our students. And so wanted to, again, touch on a bunch of these. And again, please feel free if you want, if something on the screen pops out at you and you're like, wow, I really want to talk more about that or engage in discussion, please just unmute yourself and just jump right in. And please just identify yourself by name so I know who I'm talking to because I can't see you. But this first one, and I broke them up in kind of three because they are somewhat related. So we know degree-seeking enrollments in higher ed has been going down for 10 consecutive years, and it's going to continue to go down. We're seeing more and more students make different choices in their post-secondary in their post-secondary life. We're seeing more and more students, as I mentioned earlier, doing training camps and like coding camps and things like that. And it's evident because the importance of college among young adults has declined nearly 50%. It's just not what it once was. And I think that part of that is the increase in the marketing that's going out there that's saying, hey, you don't have to go to college. You can get a career in 9 months with blah, blah, blah. And that is resonating a lot. On the flip side, back in the 80s, for those of you who can remember that, we really moved into this everybody should go to college. And we did that, and college enrollment rates went up and up and up and up. You had more and more schools starting to shape their enrollment with more applicants than they had spots. So they were able to shape their enrollment, and that's when the whole ranking system started and whatever. But a lot of that was driven for financial reasons. The federal government figured out that they could give out money and have a nice revenue income stream that would come in. But we also know, after we talked last week, that the student debt is significantly higher than it was. So it kind of, if looking in our rearview mirror, when we said, hey, all students should go to college, maybe that wasn't the best course of action, because there were students that and still come into college because of it's an expectation. It's just what they think they should be doing next, when that really doesn't suit who they are. The last point on here, I think to me was a little unnerving, that only less than 10% of high school students are confident that we have the best colleges and universities in the world. And we know that there is some good data into this. And it doesn't, I don't know, I don't think it's surprising. When I read these three, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I never thought. No, it's kind of these things we know, but I think it's another thing that we need to be reminded about. Hey, Cynthia, in the PDF where we that'll be underneath the recording of this, all of these are linked to the article in which they come from. So I hope that that answers the question. But yeah, you'll have access to that. And if you want it sooner, just shoot me a note or an email right after this, and I'll just send over the deck. And that goes for anybody that you can dig into these a little bit more. All right, any conversation or discussion around this that somebody wants to chime in? Okay, all right, so we'll move on. Let's see, there we go. Again, I don't think there's anything on here that we don't know. But again, why do we value why do students value higher education? If we had a room, I mean, I know you guys just went through orientation, right? If we were to sit down in that room with the orientation group that you had, and let's say you had 100 of them, and you said, why are you here? What percent are going to say to get a job? If not 100%, pretty darn close. And then on the other end, if you had their parents in another room and you ask them, why are you sending your child here if they're more of a traditional age college student? The significant majority are going to say, so they can get a job and move out of my house so I can get my life back. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, this is, and I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing, because we in higher ed kind of walk this tightrope, and it feels like it's the tightrope across the Grand Canyon, where we are balancing this. Well, how do we be an institution of higher learning and help students make this transition to the next chapter of their lives, and what they want versus what we've done historically? And that tightrope is challenging. Now, I think that the answer that I would give and how we can bridge these two, and that's obviously going to be experiential learning, because that it connects the two and allows the student to see the value of their major and their profession earlier, gets them to try out some different things. So we maybe even eliminate some career mismatch at the point of graduation. They get to earn hopefully money while they're doing this, so it reduces the financial burden. So we know that, again, what John Dewey said, when reducing that barrier between life in school and out, the pupil is engaged. We know that there's a ton of Americans out there with some college but no degree. This is a really important group that I think that by having a culture of experiential learning, that we can actively go after. For example, I'm a faculty member with Southern New Hampshire University. I teach in the MBA program, but I know in conversations in the undergraduate program, that's who they're actively reaching out to and saying, hey, how about coming to SNHU to complete your degree? This is a market that, with the right message, that we can really go after. The last one was a little surprising. The percentage of aspiring adult learners who believe education will be worth the cost dropped 77% to 59% since 2019. Those believing education will help them get a job dropped from 89 to 64. So I think there's some different messaging in there, especially when you look at number 4. Okay, if my number one reason for getting a college degree generally is to get a job, but only 64% said that education in higher education will help me get that job, we start to see where they get confused and where they see, like, why should I do this? Why should I invest X number of years in my life when I can go over here and take a 9-month credentialing course and just do this thing that I want to do? And as faculty, I know that we could all sit around the table and spend the next 3 days giving really solid, great reasons about why a undergraduate degree is valuable in the critical thinking skills and the analysis and the ability to interact with others and all of the things that are part of that collegiate experience. that I'm not quite sure that many still value, which is kind of disheartening. Any comments on these points? Okay, we'll move forward. So our students that are coming in, and I mentioned this in our previous webcast, this is the least working population of young adults ever. And I saw this, and I knew this a while ago, and I saw something about this, I think back in maybe 2018, 2017. And I remember thinking, no, that's not true. But then I went to the grocery store and I looked at the individual who was checking me out and bagging the groceries and stocking the shelves. They weren't high school kids. And I was there at a time when high school kids would be working, right? In the afternoon, evening. And I started to kind of look around. I went to a fast food restaurant, wasn't a high school kid. I went to a restaurant, the individual who was waiting tables, the host or hostess, they weren't who I remember 10, 15, 20 years ago being in those roles. So a lot of this is our parents doing. I don't want to say fault, because I think that they do have good intentions, because they're like, oh, you have to get into a good school or you have to do this. So we're going to over program you with all of these different school and extracurricular activities because that's what's important. Well, from the other end of that pipeline, you have employers who are saying, well, our students aren't employment ready for work when they graduate. Well, why? Because many of them have not had that basic kind of first boss experience, right? So that internship, or even sometimes that first job after graduation, is the first time that they've had a boss not named mom, dad, or professor. So let's see, 6% of college and university trustees strongly agree that higher education institutions in the U.S. have strong understanding of what employers look for in job candidates. But yet 96% of university provosts give their institutions very effective ratings at how well they're providing. We talked about this, the Inside Higher Education survey and the Hart research data, where 96% of provosts said, hey, our students are employment ready, but only, 33% of HR professionals agreed with that statement. So again, the gap is there. How do we close the gap? Well, I think you would know my answer if somebody would ask, and that would be internships and other forms of experiential learning. So any comments on these? Preet, thank you very much. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Typed in, oh, I'm sorry, Preet, you are muted by the organizer, but you did, Preet, you're up.
Okay, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for chiming in.
Yeah, I've already put my question over there, but that's a half question. So I really like the information that you have shared with us about experiential learning or to engaging the students. Those are great tips. I think you have given to us in this and in the previous session also. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But you're welcome. My concern as a professor is what kind of changes we need to make in our curriculums, in our programs, so that when students complete our programs, they'll get a job. Because post this COVID situation, which I don't know when we can rightly or correctly use our term post, right. Our system is social structure is going to be entirely different. As a professor, I don't know whether police, I'm a professor of criminal justice. Okay. Police departments will need more jobs, or corrections will need more jobs, or we'll open more restaurants, or I don't know what will happen in the society.
Oh, am I pronouncing your name correct, Preet?
Absolutely fine, sir. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Preet. So again, if I had this answer, believe me, every professor on the planet would be calling me and I would have already sold it and retired. I don't think we know. I think it's good that you're asking the question though. And so for example, one of the things that, so I teach in the MBA program, and I teach in the organizational behavior, leadership development, and I pretty regularly will reach out to individuals that are, chief learning officers at organizations that I've worked with in the past, or VP, chief human resource officers, and I'll say, hey, you know what? This is what we're talking about in my leadership development class. How does this mesh with your leadership development initiatives within your company? So really getting their input at that one-to-one level. Yes, advisory boards are fantastic. If you don't already have an advisory board, I think that is a direction that you might want to look at within your program, of pulling people who are in the field, people that are out there, in your case, the sheriff's office, or the Department of Corrections, someone over there, and putting together that advisory board. But even more so, just on a one-to-one level, and listen to what they say. And don't be so quick to say, well, we teach that, or we teach that, or that's in the, just listen. Just let them get it off their chest, right? And then you can come back and say, here's what we're doing. Are there ways that we could enhance it from your perspective? And I think that that's a really interesting way to engage and kind of bridge this this divide that we've created. So, I know I'm getting ready. Next term, I'm teaching the MBA capstone class, and I'm going to be having a panel discussion with some chief human resources officers that I'm bringing into our virtual classroom. But I'm already starting to reach out to those folks and saying, hey, this is what we're looking at. What's most important to you? So that would be kind of one suggestion that I would have. And I think that, but by continually asking the question with your colleagues, with other folks that teach at other institutions, I mean, you've solved, half the battle right there, just by asking the question and being conscious that that's important.
Hey, Prit, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Prit, this is Shelly Tolliver. We actually just got an email from somebody from the Alabama Department of Corrections this morning who wants to set up an internship program with the Department of Corrections. So I would love to talk to you about this. So I will get a hold of you next week sometime, okay?
Oh, thank you. I'm not actually from the corrections. I'm cyber crime specialist. So,
Okay.
but that is part of my program. But I would love to talk to you. Thank you so much. And
Okay.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Again, and a lot of times these things are already happening. We just need to have better communication to make it happen. All right, so thank you very much, Prit, for chiming in. Brooke, I'm just going to read your comment. I 1000% agree that every student needs an internship before graduation. You are preaching to the choir, my friend, and it is critically important, and that's why, as you know, I've made it my life's work to make sure that happens as many times as I can, because it is so incredibly powerful to help students, especially first gen, especially underrepresented minorities, especially I think students of disadvantage in any way, shape, or form. This helps because historically internships have been for the privileged, and we're gonna break that barrier down. All right, so moving on. Okay, so again, more of these points. 26% of the working populations with college experience strongly agree that their education is relevant to their work and day-to-day life. I mean, if somebody were to ask me, how relevant is your undergraduate degree into what you're doing now? I would say not at all. My undergraduate degree is in comprehensive secondary social studies with a focus in political science and history. I'm supposed to be a history teacher and a basketball coach at a high school. That would be direct relevance. But because I work in this field, I can say things like every part of my undergraduate experience is relevant to who I am today and what I'm doing. So for example, the communication classes that I took, that mandatory fine arts class that I had to take about theater is completely relevant. Improvisational theater, which is, well, heck, I'm using that right now, right? I mean, I'm presenting, I'm on stage, and I'm using some of those things that I learned there. So I don't think a stat like that should scare us tremendously, because I think that they're saying, well, if you're a history major, are you teaching history? Well, no, but I understand the geopolitical things that are happening in our society today. And that's where I think we're missing some of the boat. So again, those who strongly agree their education is relevant to their work in day-to-day life are 5.5 times more likely to say their education was worth the cost. Again, I don't know if that's or should be, concerning as much as it makes it look. But if we can create the overall value and help with that internship, help with that experiential learning, I think they may be able to connect the dots a little bit better. Turns out the cost of college, it does not predict higher alumni ratings about the quality of their education. The opposite is true. Total cost of attendance predicts lower ratings. Interesting. And I think that students today are looking at value in a different way. So for example, yes, I could go to a out-of-state school, and that would be very expensive for me. But you know what? I can get, the College of Business at that school and the College of Business at this school. Guess what? They're both AACSB accredited. So why should I go there and pay such a premium when I can just stay in my community and be there? So I wanted to, Christopher mentioned, I try to also connect the content to their daily lives. I teach them why learning this information is an advantage, and that's excellent. I mean, again, making it relevant to where they are today so that they can make that connection. And then, oh, okay, all right. So any conversation around this? I want to be conscious of our time. We still have a couple here to get through.
I just wanted to make one comment real quick.
Yeah, sure, Shelley.
So I talked to Dr. Krasinski from the history department about experiential learning one time, and he puts actually in his syllabi for his courses, he includes a section on the NACE competencies. And so the NACE competencies, it's the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And so these are the career readiness skills that employers are seeking. So things like oral communication and teamwork and project planning, these sorts of things, time management. And so Dr. Krasinski actually, I was very impressed. He actually puts that in his syllabi for his courses. And so then he links his projects in the class to those NACE competencies. So instead of the students, thinking, well, why do we have to do this paper, or why do we have to do this, group project or this presentation? They're linked directly with those NACE competencies. And so that helps to really emphasize the relevancy of the projects in class. But also, I think in the long term, that helps to bridge that gap between, my current job, is not really relevant with what my undergrad degree was, because they're sort of learning that mindset throughout their whole undergraduate time, that everything that they're doing in class is for a reason, that it links to those career readiness skills. And so I think when they end up graduating, they have a better sense that everything they've done has led up to that career, whether you work in your actual, like what's on your diploma or not, that you're developing these skills.
Absolutely.
So that's
and Shelley, we've got 2 more sessions left, right? So one is talking about engaging employers, and then the other one is making the connection to the classroom, isn't it? And in that one, we're going to dive deep into those NACE career readiness competencies and really look at some really great examples of how we can draw exactly what your history professor was doing. All right, thanks, Shelley. All right, so let's move forward here. I'm a former career center director, and these 3 really kind of tore at my heartstrings, because I knew that my students, I could track every single one of them. I knew where they went. We did heavy surveying. We had almost a 97% response rate to our graduate surveys, which was fantastic because we really did have a clean picture of where our students were going. And, when I hear things like only 27% of recent graduates report having a good job upon graduation, I tend to think that may be a little skewed. Having a job and having the dream job, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, where a student says, well, what do you want to do when you graduate? And they say, oh, I want to be at a level that is 15 years down the road, but I want it in the next 6 months. That can be challenging. So I think that, yes, we have some issues with transitioning students to the next chapter of their life. I'm not quite sure it's as dire as what we see on the screen right now. How can we help this? I think you know my answer, right? We know that internships and other forms of experiential learning create these realistic frameworks in which students can understand their transition to the next chapter of their lives much better. And we know, to look at number 14, 22% took more than 7 months. Our data from InternBridge shows that 65% of students that had an internship while they were an undergraduate, and again, we use the internship as the umbrella word for all forms of experiential learning, were 3 times more likely to have a job at graduation than those who didn't. So again, we know the value, and we know that the importance of creating the culture is super important. Graduates who had an interview during college were more than twice as likely to have a good job waiting for them compared to graduates who didn't have an internship. Again, I think there's enough data points out there that serve this and validate how critical this can be for our students. And I think that when we're dealing with a population of I hate to use the word non-traditional learners. I guess that shows how, dates me a little bit, but populations of direct from high school students, and how important this can be for them as they move forward in their to the next chapter of their lives. Any conversation in and around this? Okay, let's see here. All right, so only half of all college graduates report visiting or accessing career services during college. This, again, when the ratio of career center professionals on a campus across the United States is 1,500 students, over 1,500 students to one person in the career center. That's a significant problem. And we talked about this in that first, I think we talked about this in that first webcast, where, the investment that the colleges and universities make. If I'm a university president and I have $5, most likely I'm going to put 4 of that into recruiting and admissions versus career services, because I can measure more quantifiably and short-term measure the return on those $4 than I can investing in a career center activity or staff where I might not see that return for 2, 3, 5, 7 years. But again, there's other data that shows that students that have a job at graduation start giving to their institution through charitable donations long before students that don't have a job at graduation. So again, we need to be, again, what's the word I'm looking for? It is the entire university. It's not just career services. It's not just faculty. It's not just, it's all of us kind of coming together and saying, how can we help this to happen? So for example, if in a course you're requiring some type of experiential learning, you could say, hey, you need to go to the Career Center to get your resume done, and you need to go over and see Shelly and her team at the ranch, because that's where the internship opportunities are. So now we're facilitating the culture that we want to have and making sure that we have pathways that students can walk down that make it easy for them to achieve these things. Okay, any discussion on this as we kind of start to wrap up our time together here today? Okay, so the last two, I think they wrap it up nicely. Despite the importance of internships and the need for equitable access to them, 68% of colleges do not provide any stipend for students to pursue low pay or unpaid internships. Again, for, oh geez, I could probably spend the next hour talking about paid versus unpaid internships. We see less and less of them in especially for-profit companies, because it's just not if they're not investing their resources, they find that there's not a return on that. So unpaid internships a lot of times have gone away. But for those that remain, they generally go to students of privilege, students who can afford to do an unpaid internship experience. So we need to be conscious about that. But that last piece, that number 21, and again, what we talked about this last week, students get their most valued career advice from faculty. They trust us, they look up to us, they are looking to us to help them make this transition. And we have the ability to facilitate that experience by supporting and creating this, experiential learning culture at our campus. And, for example, it could be, implementing the NACE career readiness competencies, which again, if you want to have that, we can certainly get that out to you so you can kind of see how that matrix works, and what those competencies are, and start to align what you're doing in your classroom to these things, and then telling them why you're doing it, telling them how, and showing them that it's so important. So yeah, we play a really critical role in their lives. And I think that come, with what's quote my Spider-Man movie, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that's why we're all here and talking about this. And I certainly appreciate everyone's time on a Friday afternoon. But wanted to Gary just asked a question. He said, in cybersecurity, it's extremely difficult to get a job without experience, whether through paid internships or volunteer work. Sometimes you have to invest your own time to get the experience that you need to get the job later. Yes, absolutely. You are correct. I think, employers do have a moral and ethical and a legal responsibility that if they are having work done for their firm, that they should be paying those students adequately. Not every, even, I'm not saying that, job shadowing or things like that, but if they're doing an internship, it really should be paid. And again, the significant majority of employers understand that, because they're looking at the internship not from the educational development standpoint, but from how do I develop a talent pool that I can hire and that is going to, be good for our company and our industry. But again, there's a lot that we can do to fertilize that field, if you will, to make sure that our students are open and ready and prepared to do experiential learning. And some of that we can do even into the very first class of their freshman experience, all the way through, and connecting these dots for them and with them. So again, please enter any questions that you might have. Would love to, and I'll stay on for as long as anybody wants to chat. But here we are at the end. My contact information, if you want me to email this deck out to you, so you have the links to the articles that were referenced, please feel free. And again, I did not do any of that research myself. That is, again, all kind of aggregated from different places. But I think it tells a pretty compelling story of the power and the importance of that power that we have in creating these environments for our students so that they can make that transition to the world of work. Shelley, any housekeeping things that we need to address? I know that we've, when's our next session? Well, I'm guessing that Shelley may not be with us. That's all right. Okay, so will you be covering experiential learning for core courses freshmen? Melinda, that's a great question. I don't know specifically, but what I do know is that that is something that is important and we do need to do. We need to be talking about and helping the students to build a vision for their future. I don't know whether you were on the call last week when I said that if we look at all of the retention and persistence data that's been produced over the last, I don't know, 40 years, going back to Vincent Tinto's breaking work in the late 70s about retention and persistence. If we could just boil it all down to its core essence, there's really just two concepts that are consistent. And that is that students persist to degree completion if they have a vision for their own future and they believe that somebody cares about them. If we can do those two things, we are so far ahead of the curve. And I have yet to meet a faculty member who doesn't care about their students, that doesn't care about what they're doing in their experiences and in their classrooms and wanting to help. So we've got half of it covered. Now we just have to help them build a vision for their own future. And we know that that experiential learning in all shapes, sizes, and forms can certainly facilitate that. So thank you, my friends. August 27th is our next session. And that is where we're going to be talking about putting the pieces together, connecting the classroom to career. And that our main topic of conversation is going to be those NACE career readiness competencies and maybe some ideas that we can share and talk about how we can integrate those concepts into our class. And even if we are already integrating them into our classes, how we can, for lack of a better term, how we can make sure we hit them with a 2x4 in the forehead with it so that it's so obvious that this is what we're doing and they understand the connection that, that they can take forward. And then the last session is on September 10th, creating intentional outcomes, engaging with community partners. And that is as we start to get ready for our employer-focused workshop that we're doing on September 17th. So Gary, thanks for keeping me in line there. I appreciate it. Thank you all so very much for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.